So let's dive into styling. And here you learned before that there is no CSS support in React Native, so we don't add CSS files or use the CSS language in general, but you learned that we have two main ways of adding styling, by either adding styles inline by passing a style object to props, or by defining a separate object which is then also passed through props. Now we do define our styles in JavaScript then, but the JavaScript properties we can set are inspired by the CSS language, though it's only a subset of the properties and features supported by CSS, and not all the names are exactly the same, as you will see. But let's now see how styles can be applied. For that, we can use the style prop, which is not supported on all elements, but on some elements. For example, on the view, but also on the text. For example, here on, let's say, this text here, we can add the style prop, and then as a value, you can pass a JavaScript object. And in this object, you can set all the supported style properties. And React Native decides which properties are supported. And these are the properties that are similar to the CSS properties, but not exactly the same. For example, here on this text, we could add a margin. And as you see, as I start typing, we get this nice auto-completion here in VS Code. We get this automatically because VS Code understands which kind of properties can be set on this object that is passed to the style prop. Now here we could add a margin, either in one specific direction or in multiple directions by combining multiple properties, or in all directions by setting margin. Now, different style properties need different kinds of values, and you will see many examples and learn which kind of value goes into which style property throughout this course. Margin, for example, typically wants a number, and this number will then be translated to pixels, which are automatically adjusted to the device pixel density. For example, here we could enter 16 to have a margin of 16 pixels. If we save this, we get some spacing around this. Now it's not super good to see because we don't know exactly where the text box ends. To make this a bit more visible, we could add a border. Now in vanilla CSS, you could add a border like this, for example. This would add a red border with 1 pixel width around an element in vanilla CSS. But if I type this kind of code and save this here in React Native, we actually got no effect here, and I got an error here in the terminal and a warning here on my simulator. We can click on this to get more details, and we see that this is an invalid value for border. Actually, the key border already is invalid, so it's not even the value, but border is not a supported key. The reason for this is simply that this border property doesn't exist. I mentioned that the styling language is inspired by CSS and close to CSS, but it's not exactly the same. Instead, as we type border, we see that various properties exist which we can set. For example, we can set a border width property, and this again wants a number to set a certain border width in pixels, like 1 pixel, or 2, or whatever you want. And then we can also set a border color. Now this does not want a number, but instead a string, and in this string you could define a hex code value, or you provide one of the supported shortcuts like red, or blue, or green, or black and white, and here I will go for red. And this will now add a 2 pixel wide red border around this text. Now I'll press the auto format shortcut to make this a bit easier to read, and then save this. And with this we now got a border around this text. Now the border is pretty close to the text, but thankfully we can also add some padding. Padding, just as in the browser, is the spacing inside of an element. So here we could add a padding of, let's say, 16 again, 16 pixels, just as for the margin. And if we save this and auto format again to improve readability, now we get some internal spacing. Now, definitely feel free to play around more with those style properties. And of course, also take a look at the official docs to learn more about styling if you want to, but you will see plenty of styling examples throughout the course. These style properties were all about styling the element itself that holds a certain piece of content. We will later also learn about style properties that help us with laying out multiple components and with achieving a certain overall look. But again, that is something we will explore later. For the moment, I want to leave this inline styling approach though. This approach of defining the styles in the same line as we define this component. Because whilst this is possible and allowed, it's rarely the best way of adding styling. So typically we should go for style sheet objects. The reason for this is that this allows us to clearly separate our JSX code and our styling code, and it also makes our styles reusable. If we define styles inline, and I want the same styling on this text, I have to copy and paste this so that I can add my style prop here and add the same styling. And I'll auto format this to make it more readable. So now I had to copy and paste to replicate this style. And that is typically something you want to avoid. What you should instead do is create a new style sheet object, or if you already have one, as we have it here, you go to this object and you add a new property. We already have the container property. Now on the same level, I'm adding another property. The name is up to you, and I'll just name it dummy text. Again, this is totally up to you. What's not up to you is what you set as a value though. The value should be an object, as we see it here for container, and in this object, you define your style properties. So here, I could now set my margin and so on. So I can set margin 16, border width 2, and border color, I'll set this to red. And I will also set my padding, and the order does not matter, I just group margin and padding together here since they're both about spacing, but we could also add padding here and it wouldn't matter. Of course, I could have also just copied down my object from up here. Now, with such a style object defined down here, we can use it here in our JSX code, as this container is being used. It is defined down here, but you can still use it in JSX because this only gets executed after the entire code file has been parsed, basically. So here we can now replace this object by referring to styles.dummyText, and I get nice auto-completion for this as well. And I'll do this here as well. And now, yes, we had to copy the word dummy text, but of course it's way less to copy. And if we ever adjust the style, for example, we change the color to blue, we don't have to do this in two places because the name didn't change. We just had to do it in one place instead. So if I save this, we now got a blue border. And that's how we use such a style sheet object. Now, why is it a style sheet object? So an object created with help of style sheet create, which is a built-in method on this built-in object, which is imported from React Native. Well, we could have also created a styles object like this and set our styles there. But using such a style sheet object has the advantage that we get convenient auto-completion as we type our style properties here. And that makes our development life a bit easier. In addition, React Native could potentially optimize style sheet creation and management internally and pick up style sheet objects like this. This is not done right now though, so for the moment the main reason is the auto-completion. But with that, we now learned some important styling basics and some important basics about core components. I would say as a next step, we should take a closer look at creating layouts and positioning multiple elements Because typically you don't just want a couple of centered pieces of text like this. Typically you're going for different layouts, and we need to know how we can create such layouts therefore.